gift. We're going to get started a little bit just to explain a little bit. Obviously, there's way too much to totally explain General Conference to you. The books that we read are about this thick, and there are 4 of them. And so we're trying to sort through all of that. But just a quick overview for those of you who don't remember, because General Conference doesn't happen all the time. General Conference is a conference that happens every 4 years for the United Methodist Church. And that General Conference is the only body that can speak for the United Methodist Church. And they make rules that go into what's called a book of discipline. And those are the rules that we follow. They tell us things about the trustees and the finances and parsonages and our faith and all sorts of other things. They tell us about elections and bishops and the roles of clergy. If you do something fun sometime, go and look up the Book of Discipline and the job description for clergy. It is, Jesus, I don't think, would be able to keep up with all of it. It's really, really wild. But anyway, so 2016, though, was the last General Conference that was focused on everything. Because 2020, we had the pandemic. And so now this is actually the 2020 postponed General Conference that's happening in 2024. And so we did have a special General Conference in 2019. You all remember about that one. That's where we were hoping to come together and get rid of the harmful language around LGBTQ. But instead, what happened is they doubled down and they made it even harsher. And so then 2020, people were really raring to go to overturn that language, and it got postponed. So in the meantime, also at 2019, there was a Taylor plan that was created to allow churches to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church without having to go through, all of the painful process of property and everything else. So we do not own this property. You all need to know that. We hold this property in trust for the United Methodist Church. And so if we were ever to try to leave the denomination, we would either have to give them this building or buy it from them, right? So this plan, the Taylor plan, was supposed to be a gracious exit. What's kind of ironic is that it was designed to allow the progressive churches to leave. But what they don't know is that the progressive churches, those who want to welcome all and broaden the inclusivity of the United Methodist Church, said, we're not going anywhere. So, yeah, amen, right? So what ended up happening was the conservative churches used that Taylor plan to disaffiliate. Instead of waiting for what was going to be voted on in 2020, which was called the protocol. And the protocol was actually a more structured type of split. It wasn't an equal split because we knew that the conservative people would be significantly less than the United Methodist Church overall. But we were going to give them money to start their new denomination and everything else. But many of those conservative churches couldn't wait until we passed the protocol, and so they disaffiliated. Across the U.S., it's about 25% total. In our conference, it's around 20%. And in the South and in the Southeast, it's a lot more. There were whole conferences, basically, that almost ended up leaving. And so now that changes the landscape, because now we're coming to 2024, and even though the protocol is still on the table, there's no real need to pass it now, because most of the very conservative churches have left. What prompted that probably leaving was that the Global Methodist Church launched last May, and their launching was like an invitation to churches to go ahead and disaffiliate and join the Global Methodist Church. What was on the table in the protocol was somewhere, some resolutions said 50 million, some said 25 million that was supposed to go to this new denomination, which now we're thinking is not going to happen. So here we are, coming up to 2024, and there are still a lot of really cool things on the table. But one of the things that the U.S. bishops have said is that their goal for the United Methodist Church is to become far more broadly inclusive. That they do not intend to force anyone to perform a marriage if they have a conscious decision against that. And they still are looking at what's called a big tent, where we can agree to disagree, but that, would allow us to live together. However, most of the people for whom that's an issue have left. Not everyone. I did have one of my clergy colleagues call me last week and wanted me to know that, he's not on the delegation, but wanted me to know that he would support allowing churches to marry LGBTQ, but he would not support ordination. Which, I listened to him and said, thank you. The other thing that's on the table is that when we were created as a United Methodist Church, we came together in 1968, and it was the Evangelical United Brethren, it was the Methodist Church. We came together and formed the United Methodist Church. When we did that, we created 4 central conferences, which were churches that were outside of the United States. Those were Africa, Europe, Eastern Europe, and the Philippines, right? And so they were allowed, in 1968, they were allowed to adapt the Book of Discipline to their context. So let me give you an example. When I went to the Democratic Republic of Congo, I went to a village, and the village chief, when he became a United Methodist, had to divorce several of his wives and only have one. Now, what he did, which I thought was a great thing, was he created a compound and he built a house for each of his former wives, and then his current wife lived with him. So he did try to at least take care of the family. But that's an issue over there. Polygamy is a huge issue over there, and it's not really an issue here. So they adapted the Book of Discipline to their context. So much of what is in the Book of Discipline doesn't apply to overseas. There are so many things that we have to do here in the United States that just make no sense overseas. And so one of the things that we want to do, and is before the General Conference, is we want to make a plan to go to what's called regionalization. Regionalization allows us to include, so we would change the terminology, because Central Conference was also has very negative connotations. Because Central Conferences before 1968 were the conferences that had African Americans in it. So the fact that they use that language is bad enough. But what we're hoping, is that we will then go to 5 regions, and that the United States will become its own region. And what that means is that we would have a global Book of Discipline that applies to everyone. And that would be primarily our theology, our doctrine. It would be some of how we live out, some of John Wesley's understanding of how we live out our holiness. But it would be very adaptable to the context. And so those 4 central conferences would become regions, and the U.S. would become a region. Now, the real awesome thing about that is, we have issues in the United States that, Africa doesn't have. They have issues that we don't have. The Philippines has issues that we don't have. This will allow us to be very responsive to the needs within the United States. For example, one of the things that has been something that's been important to us is racial reconciliation. The United Methodist Church has been big on racial reconciliation. In some ways, that really doesn't make sense outside of the United States, because they haven't had the kind of history we've had. They have other challenges. They have issues with genocide. They have history of ethnic cleansing. We don't have that. So, this really makes a lot of sense to make it adaptable to the particular region in which you live. We tried, and many years ago, let's see, what was it, 2012, I believe, to pass regionalization. And because it's written in the Constitution, it not only has to pass by 2/3 at General Conference, it has to pass 2/3 of the annual conferences. And so it was passed at General Conference before, but the annual conferences didn't support it. We're hoping now that, there's been a lot of change in the delegations, that annual conferences will support it and allow us to make it adaptable. So that is one major thing. So so the Book of Resolutions is what we say we believe, the positions that we hold as a United Methodist Church. And again, so much of that doesn't apply to the Philippines or Europe or Eastern Europe. And so, trying to come up with a book of discipline that is for us, a book of resolutions that's for us, allows us again to respond to those issues of justice that arise. But here I want to just list for you the legislative committees. So we go down to Charlotte, North Carolina, and the very first week we're in legislative committees. What we do is we sort through all of those petitions that were submitted to General Conference, and each committee then lifts up to the plenary the ones that they want to concentrate on. And then the second week is the plenary, and that's where everybody's sitting and, you make motions and Robert's Rules of Order and all that good stuff. But here are the committees: Church and Society, Discipleship, Conferences, Financial Administration, Faith and Order, General Administration, Global Ministries, Central Conferences, Independent Commission, Judicial Administration, Local Church, Higher Education and Ministry, and Ordained Ministry. So you can see why there's so much reading, because all of them submitted petitions. And in fact, the Church and Society, which is all of the social justice causes, has so many petitions that they broke their committee into 3 because they have so much coming before them. And so the big thing then, so I've been getting together with progressive pastors who are going to General Conference. I've been getting together with UMC Next, which is looking at what comes next, and reading things from the Reconciling Ministries Network. And so one of the things that these groups have kind of coalesced around is that because there's so much on the table, we really want to pass 3 primary things. And the very first thing is we want to get rid of all the harmful language. So we want to get rid of the stance that says, homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. We want to get rid of the prohibitions against marriages of LGBTQ people in our sanctuaries and by our pastors. We want to get rid of the prohibition for ordination. So that's the first thing that we want to do, and we believe that we have the votes to do that this time, although, again, nothing's ever guaranteed, right? So that's the one thing we want to do. We also want to repeal the traditional plan, and that traditional plan, as you remember, that was the 2019 where they tampered down, and pastors who conducted same-sex weddings got an automatic 1-year suspension, and so we want to repeal that and get rid of that. And we want to adopt the revised social principles. So they've been working to revise the social principles, which is kind of a summarization or an overarching understanding of the Book of Resolutions. So it's kind of like, this is where we come from socially. John Wesley, as you all know, said that all holiness is both personal and social. And so you can't have a relationship with God that doesn't impact your relationship with other people, with the community, with the earth, and everything else. So, so that's part of what we want to do. The second thing we want to do is we want to, bless you, bless you, bless you. How many do they usually come in? 4s or 5s? I think Doug's comes in 3. So we want to adopt regionalization. So that's the second priority. So the first priority is get rid of all that harmful language. Second priority is adopt regionalization. Again, this will allow us to make, I think it creates equity across the entire connection, and it allows us to adapt the Book of Discipline to our context. And so, it allows us to then respond more quickly. I think, when we got started, a General Conference every 4 years was like, oh yeah, that'll be great. Well, now it's like, look at what changed in a month and with COVID. you know? And so I think we're finally recognizing that we need to have something that's a little bit more responsive so that we don't have to wait every 4 years to try to come up with something. And then the third priority is to stop disaffiliations from restarting and expanding. So I've had some, again, one or two of my colleagues who've said, we need to keep this disaffiliation stuff going because we didn't get out. You know, we wanted to wait and see. Well, you know, that's not the way the Methodist Church has worked for 200 years in the United States. I mean, that's just not the way we work. And so, you know, there's a sense of, you know, so sad, too bad, right? And so we don't want to let that happen again. Part of the reason why is the disaffiliations were a very painful thing for pastors. You know, I've been in relationship with many of the pastors who left for 30 years. A couple of them were ordained with me. We've worked on committees together. We've, you know, gone on trips together. We have been on mission together. We've been to Emmaus together. You know, we've done so many things together. And then to have them walk out in a way that was not as helpful or Christian-like as we might have liked, it's just painful. And, you know, so you feel like, what's my relationship with them? How do I relate to them now? Will I ever see them again in some cases? And so I think the reason why we want to stop these disaffiliations is it's time now to figure out who we are. We've gone through the separation. Let's figure out who we're going to be now that that has changed. And in a world that's changing so rapidly, we need to do this. So, in fact, the bishops are calling for another general conference in 2026. They're hoping that regionalization will have passed all of the annual conferences and that this might be a U.S. regional conference, but that is, you know, remains to be seen. But they're calling for another one in 2026 because they feel like we need to do this work now, but then there's so much other work we need to do about who are we in the future? How do we adapt to all the changes that are going on? What is God calling us to do in the midst of this, you know, rapidly changing world? And especially a rapidly changing world where, you know, honestly, the church is shrinking and aging. And so how do we be faithful to Christ now? What does that look like? And so it will be nice to focus some of our energy on that instead of our energy on fighting over who's allowed in the church. And so those are really the three priorities. There are a gazillion other pieces of legislation that are going before the conference. You can find them online at the dailychristianadvocate.org. I believe you might have to pay a small fee to get access to them. Ooh, that's not quite small. $49.99. Thank you, Deb. So there is a fee for that. But if you guys have any questions or you want to look through them, you are more than happy to look through my book. It'll be highlighted, dog-eared, and all that stuff, but you're more than happy to come and look and see what's there. But those are the, you know, three priorities. So UMC Next, Main Street USA, Main Street UMC, and my Progressive Pastors Group have all decided that those are the three priorities that we're going to focus on. Even to the point of suggesting that if we need more time, tabling much of the other legislation so that we can make sure that we can have these conversations and move forward. So are there questions on that? I'll go you, and then I'll come over to you, Nikki. Yes. We are, yes.
So, I mean, in my mind...
It's the green mic.
Just a small personal background, so I kind of left the Methodist Church after 2019, as many people did, and I'm sitting here in the pew again. So that's something, right?
I'm glad you're here.
So I
sorry.
have enough of a background of the Methodist Church to know I've got very, personally, little hope that you're going to get that passed if it's still a global church. So where do we go from there if they double down and decide not to pass it? Yes, that's the goal, but I feel like even with the disaffiliation of the United States churches, there's still enough anti-LGBT delegations from other areas of the world that are going to not want to pass that.
So in 2019, the traditional plan passed by 4 votes. It was so close. And so if you take now, the churches that have left, and because that was the coalition of the churches that have now disaffiliated, some of which have gone to the Global Methodist Church, and the central conferences. If you take away that coalition and we just have ours, I think it's closer. I mean, again, I wish I could guarantee. There are no guarantees, but I think the vote will tip slightly in our scale. I mean, tip slightly to our side, only because it was so close at 2019, so close. And a lot of in response to 2019, a lot of annual conferences in the United States voted for very progressive delegations for 2020. And that was fabulous. I mean, so it was like, a huge kind of call to action. So it's hard to feel like, do I get my hopes up again and get quashed again? Or do I just say it's never going to happen? And yet, I'm a fighter. I just am. We had a funny conversation last night about the zombie apocalypse. And the 2 young people who were just turning 30 said that, they would just off themselves. And I'm like, heck no, I'm fighting. I'm just going to make a plan. I was going to get on our pontoon boat, go out to sea, have a tarp to use as a sail when the gas runs out. I mean, I had a plan. So I'm a fighter, and I think we need to fight. And so, yes, that means getting our hope up again. And I wish that there were some other way. But whenever you fight, you're going to make yourself vulnerable. And so I think that the Methodist Church is worth fighting for, because I love our focus on social holiness, on advocacy, on all of the things that we do. I mean, when we first started here in the United States, we've got schools, we've got hospitals, we've got churches. Now, many of those schools and hospitals are only tangentially connected to us anymore, but that was us starting those because we cared about people. So I'm not quite ready to give up, and I think even to 2026 if we have to, because to me that would be, worst case scenario would be that we don't pass the removal of the language, but we're able to get regionalization. And I feel like many of the conferences in central conferences know the stakes. And so they know that if they keep blocking this, there are going to be consequences. I know for Epworth, one of our consequences after 2019 was, and I know this because I was in the conference office then, and Linda Kaufman called me and said, we don't want to give to anything that is anti-LGBTQ. So I went through the entire budget for the General Conference and came up with about 10% that were things that would be seen as anti-LGBTQ. And so Epworth to this day pays 90% of our apportionments. And I've told the DS, I've told the previous bishop, not the current bishop, hadn't asked, but that no, this is what we're doing because we're not going to support anything that's anti-LGBTQ. So, and also in 2022, you all may remember from the last town hall meeting that Bo and I decided that we were going to do weddings. And if that meant that we got in trouble, it meant that we got in trouble. So, you know, I feel like there's enough momentum now that we will get it passed. Whether it's we have to wait until 2026 or not, you know, I don't know. But I just feel like we're so close. I don't want to give up now. Yes, ma'am. You want to take the microphone?
I just want you to respond to this. It's my understanding that leaders around the world are supporting this, that in Africa, in Eastern Europe, that they are getting behind it and saying, we need to go this way.
Yes.
Now, they each have some of their own reasons for doing that, but that's my impression. Is that correct?
Yes, that is my understanding as well. From I've read a couple of articles that have said not everybody in the central conferences supports this, but many, many people do. And I don't want to make it sound like it's a selfish motive, but part of the motive is if they start killing the United States church, we support all of their ministries. It's funding. We pay for their bishops. We support, we give so much money to so many missions in other conferences. And so, I don't mean it to sound like that it's all about the money, but it's about your ministry. And if you care about your ministry, then you'll make compromises that will allow you to continue your ministry, but that will also allow, the U.S. church to continue to grow. And again, even to this day, when Barna does, why am I having a hard time thinking today? Not surveys, but yeah, basically surveys, where they call people and ask, still the number one reason why people don't go to church is because the church's stance against LGBTQ. It's the number one reason. And when you get under like 30, that's huge. It just jumps way up. So young people don't understand. They don't get it. And so, I feel like for the future of the United Methodist Church, and I don't mean to be flippant with that, but if we go under, the churches around the world go under, at least as United Methodist. And so, I feel like that they understand the full ramifications of this vote. So, everything we've heard is that they are going to support it. And again, yeah, there's some people who won't, but I'm going to get over to Nikki, and then I'll come back to you in a second.
Yeah, my first question would be, in all of the conferences, are women represented to the men, to have a really good mix there, because that's important. Mm-hmm. That really is. And secondly, with all the things that they've done to take history out of schools, and when you're getting on in the school system, took prayer out, and when you don't have that kind of influence on those levels, it's really hard to reach people. Will that ever change? And number three, the policies, to really get the verbiage in there that because you're only as good as your policies written. Mm-hmm. And but the thing that's most, I think, important is that no matter what you're doing, if people like you, if you know how to approach them, with respect and kindness, you're going to get pretty much, a lot of good stuff going in the right direction. But it is a convoluted situation in the world where hate and everything is so rampant. And you have to be a fighter, and I know you are. And if there's a way that just people, that aren't in the conference can get involved, to put their, 2 cents in, that would be kind of a cool thing. You know
Absolutely.
What I mean?
Yeah. So to answer your first question, Yes, women are more than equally represented. So in our delegation from Peninsula-Delaware, 3 of the 4 delegates are women. Myself and Megan Shatama-Weston, who's the other clergy delegate, and then Bill Westbrook and Regina Nichols is the 4th delegate. So ours is very much, pro-women. A lot of U.S. delegations have a lot of women. And surprisingly, there are a lot of women from the central conferences. When I went to 2019, there were, female Filipinos, there were female, people from different countries in Africa, whether it was Congo or Liberia. So even though it's slower for women over there, like when I went to Congo, they were not very supportive of female DSs, and certainly not a female bishop. But, I think we're changing. And the second, yes, about the, especially Black history in school, one of the nice things is in Florida, when they took away the AP course on, I can't remember the title of the course, but it was a course about African American history. A United Methodist Church teamed up with the teacher and taught it at their church, which I just think is awesome, because it's like, okay, take it out of schools. We're going to make it come back. And see, that's the kind of thing we need to be able to have the ability to do, is to respond in real time to those sorts of things. As far as like getting your voice heard, certainly, joining things like the Reconciling Ministries Network so that people know, we are, strong. Yeah, we're strong and we're growing. One of the things, if you follow their Facebook page, every time they have a new group of people or a new church join, they celebrate that. And I love how Murray will often say, "Hey, welcome from Epworth." And so, joining something like that lets people know that there's a lot of us out here who want full inclusion. And so, that would probably be the best way to kind of get your voice heard in those terms. Debbie had a question, and then I'll come back.
So I also want to give an invitation, so let me do that before I forget. Next Saturday at 1 p.m., I chair the Baltimore-Washington Conference Area Reconciling Methodists, and we will be hosting Jan Lawrence, who's the Executive Director of Reconciling Ministries, and we will also have a Zoom link that if I can get that to you, maybe
Yes.
put it in Wednesday's announcements,
Yep.
so that folks could remotely join that conversation.
Yes.
I appreciate Pendel's priorities. RMN's has it a little different and feels that regionalization has to be first,
Yes.
because the language won't change until it's regionalized. So
Yeah.
everybody's coming at it a little differently. So one of my questions is, we all know it's great to know your enemies. And if you continue to get information from Good News and the Wesley Covenant Association, they are still planning to have a presence
Yes.
at General Conference. Some of us were there to hear Bishop Easterling, was that last week or the week before, who honestly talked about the pain as bishop for disaffiliating churches. But she said, we're in a new place and we need to focus on those who have stayed.
Yes.
Let go of those who have left, wish them well.
Mm-hmm.
How at General Conference are we going to, and again, part of your priority is not to let the disaffiliation process go on, but how do we call out
Right.
those who still want to destroy, even though they've left?
Yes.
Because many of us say, it's painful to let you go, but we are here to say the table's open to all.
Exactly. I know one of the things that we were asked to do was to go through our list of delegates and to say, once they disaffiliated, they were removed from the delegation. And we actually had, let's see, 4 people removed from they weren't primary delegates, they were reserves. We had 4 people who were removed from our delegation because they disaffiliated. And then we were asked to say who is in the Wesleyan Covenant Association and try not to allow, like if they're reserves, not to allow them to have a seat at the table. So I have one person, he's a second reserve. He's an African-American pastor, he's retired, and he is the chair of the WCA for our conference. And I basically told him he will not get a voice at that table. So, even if we have to, wear Depends or whatever we have to do to not run out to the bathroom, he's not getting a voice. I'm just not going to do it. And so some of it is trying to make sure that those in our delegation who are, now the two lay people are more conservative. However, they're not WCA, and I don't think they would vote against removal of the language. I don't know for sure. They're more conservative than our clergy delegation is, like I said, myself and Megan Shatama Weston, who are both very progressive. So anyway, that was one of the things we were asked to do, was to go through our delegation, and if there were people who were at least reserves, we couldn't do anything if they were primary unless, we could have the conversation. They encouraged all of us to have the conversation and say, if you're part of the WCA, show some integrity and step down, because you are here to destroy the United Methodist Church. We are here to build it up and to continue moving forward. Like I said, I had that conversation with one of our people, and I know people had those conversations, around at least the U.S., which is where the WCA was centered. Other than that, we'll try to use Robert's rules. I'm on a text group that, for General Conference, so that if we can figure out ways to do Robert's rules to get them to shut down, whatever that looks like, we're going to do that. So that's the cool thing, is that I feel like progressives are not typically good at strategizing, and yet this has rallied us. And I feel like there's a lot of strategy that is around this General Conference to say, no, we've had enough, this is going to happen. So again, we can't control all of it, and I'm sure, I know that there have been people, I still get the good news because I read it and want to see what's out there, but people who will say, I'm not disaffiliating because I want to stay in the United Methodist Church and change it. And it's like, sorry, I think that ship has sailed. Again, I know I'm hopeful, but I just really feel like there's enough energy and anger and, desire to make this a fully inclusive church that I think we'll get there. Whether it's through regionalization or this year, getting rid of the language, we will get there. Back here.
My name is Chuck, and I am a self-professed church polity geek.
Oh, good.
So, my apologies here. Most of the question I had was actually asked and answered just a minute ago,
Okay.
and I very much appreciate that. I'm very concerned that there are elements of the Wesleyan Association that are going to be attempting to impact this, and it was good to hear that there are some procedures in place and some strategies that are being thought through. With regard to the delegates from the Pendel Conference or from the Baltimore-Washington Conference or wherever, is there a way to provide a means of communicating with the delegates so that those of us who truly care can make sure they're aware of our
Absolutely. So we have an email address. If you go on the Pendel website, pen-del.org, there is a button on there that says email the delegation, and I believe it's Pendel delegation at pen-del.org, but I'm not 100%, but it sends it to all the delegates.
Everyone in this room to do that.
Yes, absolutely. Because again, I know for the most part where you all stand, but it would be really good for other people to hear it as well. Because that just reminds people, it's not just, we're not just people out on the edges anymore. We're gaining the central voice and becoming the people. So,
Vicki, does Epworth have a lay delegate you can send that that you send? Is there a representative from Epworth?
No. So the way that conferences work is we have a charge conference for the church every year, and that's all of our reports and elections and things like that, setting the budget. And then we have an annual conference. And to our annual conference, we are allowed to have people attend, lay people attend. And Epworth has 2 pastors, and we have over 500 members, so we have 3 lay delegates. And it is Murray Archibald and Mike Tyler and Ruth Ann Curley. And so they went last year. We were down at UMES, and so there's 3 of them, and Bo and me that go for our annual conference. And that's where, then at annual conference is where we elect delegates to the general conference and the jurisdictional conference. And so, that's why there's only a few of us because, we're a tiny conference for one thing, but so that gets elected from that pool at annual conference. I'll come back to you. Let me get Deb real quick.
I was going to say one more geek thing, because I'm also, I have the discipline under my pillow many nights, is that when a vote to change the Constitution comes to our annual conferences,
Yes.
it's not just that the annual conference affirms, but it will be the total global votes in favor.
Yes.
So that's a point where you can reach out to your delegates to annual conference to vote in favor, which gets that vote count out, which will be very significant when all those annual conferences take place.
Absolutely. And so if regionalization passes at general conference, then, I will be telling you all, and you all can not only let our people know, which our people will know, but also just having that conversation with other United Methodist churches that regionalization is very important, because it is both the number of annual conferences and the totality of the number of votes within each annual conference. So it's really important that it passes by a significant, by the 2/3 majority.
Sorry, I don't mean to hog this microphone at all, but there's 2 things that were said today, one of which I want to reinforce what you said from the 2019 conference. I think it was a little more than 3 votes, but it was a very small
Very
number.
small. 3%
And
maybe was.
The number of, it was 23, I think.
Okay.
But the number of votes that came from U.S. churches that have now, or U.S. conferences that have now had significant disaffiliation, far outnumbered that. So while there is a concern about the international delegations that come in, the U.S. conference has enough votes to make the change
Yes.
at this time. The other thing that I want to mention, though, harks back to your sermon this morning, and that is the power of prayer. Pray daily for what happens at this conference. Pray daily for what happens in our church. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And one of the kind of nice things is that because this is the postponed 2020 General Conference, the number of delegates is still from the 2020. And so we have more delegates probably than we should when you take into it, not Pendel, because we will always have the minimum, but overall in the US, we will have more delegates than we probably should based on our numbers. And so this would be the year that would really, I believe we would have the votes on our side.
Probably the last year that the U.S. will be majority.
Yes, probably the last year that the US would be majority. And that's why, again, regionalization is a second or first priority. It's very important to get regionalization passed and to make sure that we look at those things. Sterling, yes. Sterling is another retired pastor, former district superintendent. And delegate, yes, and delegate.
I'm confused. I'm not confused. I'd like some more clarification about the regionalization. Because is the main opposition from those who have disaffiliated and left coming back to sabotage this thing? Or is the main opposition from some other place? Because would the other central jurisdictions be in favor or against our regionalization? That's,
So from what we understand, there are some people who did not disaffiliate, but who were still part of the Wesleyan Covenant Association. They remained in the United Methodist Church because, honestly, I think they like to fight. I think they, you know, they want to win still. And so there will be some of them at the General Conference, in addition to some of the people from the central conferences. For many of them, we've heard that they are fully in support of regionalization, but there are some who are still aligned with the Wesleyan Covenant Association who will speak against it.
people that they already have it themselves,
I know.
they don't want us to have it.
Right, right. Because again, I think some of this is just so hard and so complicated when you think about countries where to be LGBTQ means a death sentence. And so for them to be a part of a church, a global church, that says not only do we love our LGBTQ members, but we're going to allow them to fully participate in all the ministries of the church by, you know, getting married, by being ordained, that threatens the status of their church in their country. And, you know, I'm not, and again, I'm not saying it's, you know, we need to fight for this, and I'm still going to fight, but that at least I think can help us understand why it's a little complex for, and why they might be more for regionalization. Because if we then go to a global book of discipline, then what we do in the US doesn't impact them as far as most of our, you know, our welcome, our inclusion, our social justice sorts of things. And so I think that's a big piece of trying to help them realize that this will actually be a better thing for us to regionalize, because then we can adapt it to our context. So, you know, I think it makes sense because of the money. I think it makes sense because it allows them to say, so they, you know, they can adapt their book of discipline and they can say, you know, homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. And as much as I don't like that, I would rather move, for us in the US, towards full inclusion, knowing that eventually it'll happen. I mean, you know, we're on, I don't say this, I say this with a lot of humility. I really believe we're on God's side on this. And so I think it's going to happen eventually across the globe. It's like women in ministry. It's like, you know, and again, it'll be slower happening in different places, but, you know, I think when it's right, we will eventually, you know, what is it, the moral arc of justice is long, or moral arc is long, but it bends towards justice. You know, so I think that leaves them with those options is, you know, do we let the US regionalize, in which case we can adapt, you know, they can adapt their book of discipline so they can still be recognized in their own country, but then we can move forward with what's important to us. Yes, ma'am.
My name's Kathy, and I'm a recovering Southern Baptist from East Tennessee. I've been recovering a long, long time. First of all, I am, every time we talk about this, I am so grateful. I wish I'd have found the Methodist Church a long, long time ago, but in East Tennessee, it probably would have been just like the Baptists anyway. But we are so privileged here to have fighters in the leadership that we have in the BW conference. Mm-hmm. It's just amazing. I'm grateful. I know a lot of my peers and friends are grateful. But I want to give a shout out to Helen Ride. Those of y'all who were here some years ago, Helen came and talked to us, and I think she's got the hardest job in the church. She's got the Southeast as a reconciling ministry ambassador. So she's going down to Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, Georgia, all those places down there, and singing the tune of all means all, and that does not fall on the right ears all the time. But she's on her way to Charlotte. She's got a Facebook page up, Helen Ride, R-Y-D-E, and she's 1 by 1, 2 by 2, 5 by 5, going down, talking to the, 3 reconciling churches in the Holston Conference in East Tennessee, which I would have belonged to if I'd stayed. And several disaffiliated churches. She's actually talking to them. And I'm sure she's going to have some tales to tell when she gets to Charlotte. But we are so lucky to have people like Helen and certainly our leadership and others that are going to bat for us. Because in so many churches that I've been associated with, that just does not happen. So thank you, Vicki and Bo, for your leadership. And I wouldn't expect anything else. So
Thank you. And I want to reiterate about prayer because, again, that is a powerful thing that you can do. And I'm trying to remember, General Conference, I know the Committee on General Conference is going to put out a prayer, daily prayer thing. RMN's not doing that, are they? Or are they?
They're right now doing a lot of workshops
Okay.
in preparation for what's happening next Saturday. It's one of those.
Right.
There's been devotions.
Yes. So I know RMN,
And there's a toolkit.
yes, there is a,
It has a lot of great resources that if you just go to Reconciling Ministry, it's the engagement toolkit.
yeah. So I do encourage all of you to go to the Reconciling Ministries Network website because, again, it's one thing, which is awesome for Epworth to be a reconciling church, but you can be a reconciling member just as yourself. And for me, that just keeps reminding people that we're out here, and there is an engagement toolkit, which is just very, very helpful in trying to figure out ways to, what do we do? How do we, how can we help make our voices be heard? Yes, an individual member, individual membership.
So having been in conversation with Jan, there are 928 reconciling either churches or communities at this point. And Reconciling Ministries has done a lot behind the scenes to help us get to this point, to be a witness at General Conference, to try to transform people's hearts so that we will move into a more inclusive church. They are losing a lot of their grants. So they are asking every church that has voted to be reconciling or community to at least give $1,000, which would get us to $928,000, which would help cover a big chunk of theirs. So I want to encourage Epworth to make sure that this is a priority even before General Conference.
Thank you. Any other? I know this is a lot. So, you can always email me, call me, text me, Facebook message me, and, we can answer some more questions. But just briefly, the jurisdictional conference will happen in July, and I believe, depending on what happens at General Conference, the plan that the Committee on Episcopacy was making with the vision team, or vision table, was that we would most likely not elect a new bishop. Partly because the GCFNA, which is the General Commission on Finance and Administration, is saying they're only going to fund 22 bishops for the whole United States. Originally, it was going to be that every jurisdiction could have 5 bishops. But if they're only funding 22, then that won't even cover that. So depending on what happens there, we probably will not have bishop elections this year at jurisdictional conference. So that's the only thing I wanted to say about jurisdictional conference. Let me just give you a quick update on the Source Collaborative. Let me tell you a couple of stories. So you all know Conley's Chapel, United Methodist Church, that's a bit more conservative. In the past, they have prevented their youth group from doing things with our youth group. They have just made it known that we are the quote-unquote gay church. And I'm like, hey, come on, we're the happy church. So they approached us this year and asked us to be partners with them in a ministry project that they're doing called Camp Hope, which is for underprivileged kids. It's 8 weeks of camp for free for these kids. And the fact that Conley's came to Epworth to ask us to be a partner with them is just amazing. Because to me, those are some of those walls that are slowly breaking down. And so, of course, we said no. Just kidding. We said yes. So we're going to be working with them, and that is one of the initiatives for the youth and families. The other initiative for youth and families, which is so awesome, and which Jeannie and Lynn especially have been working with, is Meet Me at Epworth. And Meet Me is a program for young adults with developmental disabilities, or just adults with developmental disabilities. Because when they're in school, there's opportunities for socialization, dances, things like that. When they are out of school, there's very little for them in this particular area of Sussex County. Now, if you go down further south to Selbyville, they have some things, but there's not a whole lot here. And so we've been having monthly dances, and then every week, Mickey has been doing Sunday school for 2 of our young adults here. You all know Donna and Marcy. But here's a cool story, 2 cool stories. But one was, Mickey asked Marcy, she said, you got to come to this dance. This was last September when we were just getting ready to kick it off. You got to come to the bonfire, you got to come to the dance, and bring your friends. And Marcy said, I don't have any friends except my mom's friends. Well, she came and she started making friends, and she and Donna have developed this really deep friendship in Sunday school every week. So deep that Marcy has started to make friends in the wider circle, and she said, I now have my own friends. And Donna invited her to be a part of Special Olympics, so she's playing bocce, I believe. And they're going to have a celebration for her birthday, and she said to Mickey, can I bring some more of my friends? Now, isn't that awesome? I mean, those are the lives that are being changed. And again, small in number now, but the organizations that have started hearing about Epworth and the dances and the things that we're doing reached out and said, there was an autistic foundation, and they said, we would love for our autistic young people to get involved in some mission at Epworth. And so Tom Lewis and Kathy are coming in on Wednesdays, and they're sorting the dry goods that we get for our food ministry. What an amazing gift. And one of them said, well, I like to water plants. So now we're trying to figure out if there's a way that we can help, get them to be a part of our plant ministry. But that was them approaching us. And how cool that, again, we're starting to get out in the community that when we say all means all, we don't just mean LGBTQ. We mean all, right? Different abilities, everything. So those were a couple of stories for the youth and families at Epworth. We, of course, are having John Archibald, which I am so thrilled about, come on the 23rd. And the learning community at Epworth has 4 areas that they're going to focus on. One is authors, so they're going to look at different authors to come and to talk like this. One is leadership development, so they want to do some leadership for, how do you lead the HOA committee? How do you lead, just some kind of good leadership stuff. The third one is health and wellness, and so, thinking about whether that's yoga or meditation or, just things that combine all of those. And, I forgot the 4th one. Oh, well, I'll remember it and send it out. I can't remember it right now, but health and wellness, authors, leadership, and something else. And we're really excited about, again, bringing different people. So when I wrote a letter, I did a press release, and Murray approved it, and edited it. And then I sent it to camp, so they're going to publish it. And then I sent a letter to the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice. And I said, I think your people might be interested, your alliance might be interested in this. And she wrote back and said, absolutely, thank you so much for sending this, and they're going to publicize it for us as well. But again, just thinking about different diverse communities that will come together as one to learn together, and then hopefully to have conversation and develop relationships. So that's kind of the goal, is to create a safe place. We were talking about the hatred that's in our world. But if we can make friendships across different, across our differences, then we can start to have conversations that aren't, so hate-filled. And then the last one is online at Epworth. And the thing I want to highlight about our online ministry at Epworth was Ash Wednesday. Since I've been here, Ash Wednesday has not been a big, well-attended service. We've usually had 2, one at noon and one at 6. And it just, not many people come, which is fine. I mean, it's a different kind of service. So this year, I thought, I want to do something different. So I created stations, prayer stations, kind of adapted some from different things I'd seen. And we had 50 people do the prayer stations at some time between 10 and 2. And then we had another 15 that came in the evening for the Bible study and wanted to get their ashes and participated. But before we got it started, Bo said, why don't you introduce each station and I'll video you, and we'll do that for the online people. Because we were trying to figure out, how do you do Ash Wednesday for online people, right? So we videoed each station. We had 165 people watch it online. So you combine that 165 with the 65 who came in person, that's more than we've ever had at Ash Wednesday. And so to me, that's like how we're trying to reach out beyond, the walls of the church and people who can come. And that was our way of reaching out. I don't know if you all know or not, every Sunday, and I wish Bo were here because he knows the numbers better. Oh, good, thank you. Yay. What's our kind of average online by Tuesday night? I think it's around 500 or 600, right? 500. So online on Sunday morning, we have somewhere 50, 75 that join us at 10 o'clock. But then by Tuesday night, we've had over 500 people watch. And most of those people are saying, we were on the beach on Sunday morning, or we were playing ball, or we had something else to do, or we were out late the night before. And so they're joining us online. So you add that to the people who were here in person, and you start to see the lives that we're impacting. And so that includes people who are in Florida right now, are snowbirds. But it also includes people in Chicago. It includes people in Wilmington. We have a whole group of people in Wilmington that watch every week, the Wilmington-Newark area. People in Pennsylvania, people in Western Maryland. So we have people from all over kind of this region that watch us every week. And here's a fun thing. I went to the Board of Ordained Ministry interviews. I'm on the Board of Ordained Ministry. We were interviewing new people for commissioning and ordination. And I had 3 retired pastors who came up to me and said, we watch your church service every single Sunday. And, so again, that's the power of something we discovered kind of by accident. I mean, we were recording our services and putting them online before COVID, but we weren't live streaming. So the first time we live streamed, the first Sunday after the shutdown, Mickey McManaman, our caring minister, was standing right here with an iPad, and the iPad would shake every now and then, if you remember that. So we've come a long way, baby, right? With the different cameras, and the tech team. I got to say, the tech team is a small community in and of itself. Because, yes, hey, James, woohoo! You may notice that in the back, Noah will stand right back at that little podium. He's doing sound for in-house. He's 17, I think. think he's 17, young person, and he's doing the sound. We're training another young person who is 14, and Noah's been training him to get him to run the sound. We have James in the booth, and he's up there, and he a lot of times will check the online. We have, and he'll comment. So when people say, oh, such and such, and he'll say, oh, thank you, we'll let them know. They put prayer requests in, he lets us know. We've got camera operators, we've got people doing, my son-in-law does the live stream, so he does the sound mix for the live stream. So if you see him up there with headphones on, he's not jamming out to, whatever kind, what's your favorite band, Sean? He's not jamming out to them. He's listening to the live stream so that if something goes wrong, he can correct it right away. But the cool thing is, they're the youngest people we have, besides the kids, but, they're the young people that are up there in that booth. And it's just awesome because they also will, they've got a text group, and then they'll chat each other up on text, and, sometimes they play, what do you play? Red Dead? They don't want me to tell that. Sometimes they play video games at night, so they'll be like, ooh, are you coming on tonight? So, again, it's just another small community. But we've made a lot of changes to the online service, and I really think that we're starting to see that impact. So that's our very brief Source Collaborative update. Are there any questions? 500 today, 500 is by Tuesday night. Today there was 75 on YouTube and 35 on Facebook. So yes, Miss Sue.
Do we know how many are tuning in for just the sign class?
Yes. Sign language, Bo, do you know? I think it's I don't need this. I think it's 6 or 7 that join us for the sign language, the ASL, because we do a separate ASL stream too. So we have it live on Facebook, on YouTube, and we have an ASL YouTube channel. Although we have over 103 subscribed to the ASL channel. So I think on a regular basis, probably, 6 to 10, but, from time to time, we have 100 people subscribed to that. So thank you, good question. Any other questions? I know it's been a lot longer than what you anticipated. You're probably like, it's lunchtime, right? Can I pray with you all before we go? Oh, that would be wonderful, Miss. Would you like to do that?
And maybe invite folks to come and lay hands on you?
Sure. You want me to kneel? You want me to stand?
You can stand and we'll surround you.
Okay.
Anybody else like to join in and just lay hands on a
Thank you. Yes.
delegate to General Conference? You don't have to be clergy. Gracious Lord, in this moment in time, we just pause to be still and to recognize that there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of nervousness, there's a lot of questions about future. But we know through you, O God, all things are possible. We're grateful that Vicki is willing to put herself out there, that was willing to rest her voice so that her voice can be heard, representing each of those gathered here and wider than this circle, representing this conference to speak for justice, for inclusion, for possibility, for hope. We pray not just for her presence, but to undergird her in the midst of all the challenges and possibilities that await her and all those 862 delegates and those who stand in reserve to step forward if need be. These are challenging, trying times. And we just pray that Vicki will feel our prayers, our support, our encouragement as she represents us and so many others. We know, oh God, that you can make a way. And we together say, let it be so. Amen.
Amen, amen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks. So please feel free, if you have other questions, like I said, reach out, email, text, call, and we can have further conversation. But thank you all for your time and your attention and for being here today. I appreciate it.
Do you want to try to Zoom with John or something before he comes?
Sure,
or
yeah.
you-
I mean, I trust him. I don't know
I do
that
too.
you,
I mean, he'll do whatever.
yeah,
format.
yeah.
Some people seem to think he's speaking, you know, I think
I
it's
mean,
more of an interaction.
yeah, I thought what